I think this is the 100th video. There's definitely more videos than that, but just since I've been keeping track, I'm about at 100 in regards to videos, demos, and tutorials. So welcome. Hopefully we can do some exciting painting today. I am Andrew Broussard, and in front of me I have an 11 by 15, a quarter sheet of Stonehenge aqua paper. To start things off, like usual, I am going to take the medium hake brush, the Ron Ranson hake brush, and saturate this paper. While this 100% cotton paper absorbs it, I will talk about the palette and the plan for today's painting. So let me get this all nice and raring to go. Now, it's not perfectly covered, but we could come back in a moment and re-wet it. So here's my thinking for today. I have this separate little pan, little tray that I've been doing my phthalo blue and quinacridone rose combination in. It's just, I was kind of running out of room for extra paints on my standard palette, and the standard palette's kind of pretty well established right now, so I figured I would let it run its course, and then eventually I'll do a big cleaning of that palette whenever I feel like it's just too out of control. But that's kind of like a once a year, once in every 6 month type of event. It's something I've only done maybe 2 or 3 times. Or I may order a new palette just to have this extra stuff on it. It's a butcher tray, and this one, I guess it's like a metal enamel type deal, so you can hear that. They have the plastic ones. Not really a fan of that. This is the one for my gouache. I grabbed the wrong one, sorry. I can't have the gouache on the same one as my watercolor, mainly because the gouache has that chalky aspect to it, and can kind of taint the watercolor paints. I don't mind using them together in a painting, but I like to have that separation on the palette. So anyway, today on this palette, which maybe, I don't know if these colors will eventually migrate to the other palette, but I have the Venetian red and the sap green, and I've been using those for a tonalist style painting, and then I adjust it with coolness and warmness and whatnot with ultramarine and phthalo blue. One thing I discovered, if you're running out of water in your spray bottle, you can just fill it up. Super easy trick right there. That was a little silly, sorry. I'm just filling that up. So we're going to play around with that phthalo blue, phthalo green, and the quinacridone rose in the beginning as the one tonal values, and kind of get a gray. And then from there, we're then going to experiment with our sap green Venetian red combination with ultramarine blue, our phthalo blue, and Payne's gray. Maybe we'll add other stuff along the lines, but we shall see. Brand wise, I'll mention the paints and whatnot. I do post a lot of these things on Instagram and whatnot, and started tagging the companies just so that people could see that product, and I don't know, maybe the company will one day take some interest in what I'm doing and whatnot. Who knows? And the goal of this is to continue to have fun, but anything else that happens would be great. So let's wet this already gunky mixture on there, and then we can start putting it in different directions. My idea was, like the previous painting where I had started off with this combination and then used my regular palette on top of it, was to kind of put in a far, far distant tree effect, a foggy, exaggerated atmospheric effect or aerial perspective. Mixing a little bit higher concentration. Some more pinkish. Mix a little bit more phthalo green in. A little bit more greenish. And just play around back here and create that far distant. No perfect plans or ideas with shapes. I'm literally just putting paints in there. One thing, well, here's a few things. If you ever have any questions or comments, please comment below. Please like, subscribe, follow. I'll always try to answer any questions that y'all have. If y'all ever have any landscape paintings that you would like me to paint, feel free to send them to me. Contact me through either the Facebook page or Instagram or something like that, or the Patreon account. And I would, if you want, if you have a landscape painting that you say like, oh, I'd like you to, paint from this picture. What do you think? What do you get from it? Let me know. I'll give it a try. I have some painting sources, photos from around town and whatnot, from just going on bike rides, things like that. But I don't have a big collection of different scenery, so I would like I would welcome the challenge of painting from a photo. There is one painting that I have to do soon, eventually. It is of a house. I just need to go get more photos of it. When I was out riding my bike one day, the local judge who ran a local festival, very nice lady, she had purchased one of my watercolor paintings to hang up within the city courthouse. So when she bought it, she was like, all right, it's now property of the local government, the state, or whatever you want to call it. So anyway, so she had purchased one of my paintings to hang up in the church. Did I say church? City Hall, sorry. So my painting's hanging up in City Hall, which was pretty cool. And anyway, so I saw her, and then she was like, oh, I was just thinking about you the other day. Would you mind doing a painting of my house and whatnot? I'll commission you and whatnot. I said, yeah, sure. I just got to get better photographs of it and some other stuff to work from. That was a random tangent. I apologize. #100th video, not holding anything back. Even random stories. So, with this combination, I found that there wasn't really much of a drying shift that I had to worry about, meaning that the tonal values that I had within the painting and the wet and white process held relatively true after it dried, which I was very, very pleased about. And it takes a lot of, I don't know if you'd say guessing out of the equation. It takes a lot of also going back in and darkening things up out of the equation. So I'm just literally building up masses, and in my mind I'm starting to see a potential tree mass here with the opening and then a far background one. Then in turn I can bring this closer edge out and create a watery edge. And then we'll see what happens with this guy. He might sit further back. And if we push him more green, we'll see how far back he goes. That's one of the cats wanting to come in. They made their way in here like 2 or 3 times today. They are just like all about in here. But last night I did an oil painting, and I have that palette out still with the wet oil paint on it. And I just know that a cat will pass over that. So if you have any suggestions on how to keep the art room safe and allow the cats in here, let me know. I could get some saran wrap and cover the palette. That's what we had done in college, I believe. Not that we had cats in college, it was just to prevent airflow over it. Alright, so let's take a look. We could dab a little bit in some spots. Areas with excessive moisture I'm going to pull up a little bit, mainly because as we do the drying, they can get some weird edges potentially. So I'm just texturizing and pulling up some excessive moisture. I could take the rigger brush, I could wet it, and this can push out some structures to make some things interesting in this far background. And this is just adding wet water. This is why when you do wet and wet, as you paint more and more within it, you want to increase pigment load and decrease water load, or you'll get this effect, which is generally frowned upon unless you're using it for this purpose of actually creating these shapes. Not frowned upon, they call them cauliflowers, and a lot of people don't like having those. And accidentally they don't like them, but you know, purposefully you can get some interesting stuff taking place. Okay, so like I said, this is going to be far background, and then on top of it I'm going to come forward and paint in the other palette. So that's the experiment for this one. Last time I did this, I used the Ron Ransom palette over these two colors, over the Phthalo green and the quinacridone rose. By the way, I'm using a combination of Da Vinci brand and Van Gogh brand. The Venetian red, and all I did was I didn't even rinse off the brush, I just went like this. The Venetian red is Da Vinci brand. So is the sap green. This color combination, every time I use it, I explain where I got it from. This comes from two contemporary tonalist masters that I follow. They do the oil painting, and I do that as well, but I wanted to try my hand at bringing this palette over into watercolor. So it's essentially mixing two complementary colors, and from this combination you get a brown with some green aspects and red aspects. So it works very well for nature paintings and landscapes, and it also really just gives off that vibe of like the old master paintings. It kind of is reminiscent of the underpaintings that you would see, also reminiscent of the tonalist masters of the 1800s and early 1900s. Okay, so this one, I am now going to put these into the foreground. I didn't do any drying off. I'm just going wet and wet, just as if I was starting this from scratch. But I am going to limit it as if it is a closer image being painted, as if this is a midground and foreground, and the previous colors were the background. So that is the experiment. How this one sits on top and in front of these guys. So with aerial perspective, atmospheric perspective and whatnot, as you recede, you usually drop the tonal value where it's kind of very light. You so recede meaning going back into the painting, so it gets very light, and you also will have a general color shift, and it's just general. This is if scientifically what's happening is we have layers of air between us and the far objects, and those layers of air have influence what it looks like, because air is molecules, it's oxygen, it's all that type of stuff that's in it. Anyway, so as you recede, and this is, I read somewhere that you lose the yellows first within the color mixes, and then you lose the reds, and that's where you get more blue, purple at the end. So greens will kind of go towards a blue, and as they come closer, they go towards the green due to the yellow aspect in it. So I'm just kind of creating this shape here, seeing how I want this to work. I do like this connection of the colors from the back down in here. I do start texturizing at this point, typically, if I was to just do this color combination. I'm curious how it affects the edges and the softening due to having the paint in the background. It might just naturally be doing the softening itself with wet and wet and having that blend take place. So gingerly texturizing, not relying on it too much, but I am going to grab some ultramarine to now shift darker. So ultramarine mixed into this. I found that ultramarine, phthalo blue, and Payne's gray as kind of pushing this color combination around really gets the full benefit of it. I have a hard time with the watercolor aspect of sap green and Venetian red of getting darks from it. So playing around, this was the solution that I found. And areas of more density of foliage, areas of foliage that aren't quite catching light and whatnot, we have light from the background. They're going to be darker, so softer on the edges, darker on the inside of the trees, darker at the bases, darker in the shadows. We can blend masses together. Dark at the edge, reflection. Those are the ideas that I'm just keeping in mind. If I introduce phthalo blue into this, I can mix and get some purples and whatnot. I could get this other darker green as well. And I find that this one pops a little bit forward more. So I allow that for the kind of closer foreground. Now, yeah, so I added the phthalo blue into that sap green mix. And I feel like it does look a little phthalo greeny. And what I should have experimented with is just pure phthalo green at this point. Though we'll see. You know, if I make a palette with these 5 or 6 colors on one palette, then that would start being the experiment there. And I think experimenting is what drives my paintings and this channel, essentially. I'm always trying to have new experiments for y'all where I can do the same thing a few times and I don't mind, but I was explaining to somebody the other day, they were asking, do they find that repainting the same scene over and over again, they were asking, like in general, on a Facebook page, if we found that was helpful for ourselves as painters. And I said, you know, for me, it helps a little bit. And there's some people that will repaint over and over again that it really helps them out. But for me, I need to switch things up to keep a freshness going and to prevent myself from burning out. Or if I painted the same image over and over again, I would just start burning out. So that's why there's sometimes just drastic changes between one painting to the next. I let the colors mainly work for themselves, where eventually I get to the point of just thinking, okay, I need a dark. And this is with any palette that I do. And then whatever the go-to dark mixture is. For this one, it's just kind of like the blue, red, green. I get a dark, and that's good enough for me at this point. I could start putting the Payne's Gray in and darken that, and I'll do that probably in a moment. Yep, let's just grab Payne's Gray right now and put him along the edge. And a little bit of texture and direction to this ground. We're still super wet and wet here, so we can play around with what takes place. I feel like we'll need to put more foliage into these trees, at least in the middle, and we're going to need some foreground elements that wind up coming up. So let me get the hake, let me get the Payne's Gray mixed into this mix. Since everything's wet and wet, I can take a card, and it's something I talk about a lot in the videos, is that when you scrape with the super wet and wet, you're just going to get backfills, and you'll just get dark lines. But you can take it and do horizontal as you go up to get yourself a tree trunk. So you have to just essentially grab more paint in one stroke to prevent it from backfilling. So here are foreground trees, foreground elements. You could do midground elements also, but let's see. So you see how we're pushing that paint out. And it creates that dark edge along it, so you could probably utilize that dark edge to put it along the backside, so and push in the other direction. Then reflections. It reflects down, so it's going to come this way in that curve. I'll put a second tree right there. Let that shoot out. And we'll give it branches and whatnot in a bit. So this guy's going to reflect. We could also have other tree elements or bush elements here. This is where it would help to have, going from a photo to help compositionally. Here. Let's do very thin. So much so that they'll probably backfill a little bit, or mostly, but we'll come in super dark over it and play around. So we'll do a thin grouping. Thin, tight grouping of trees right here. How does that sound? have to push down very aggressively with this. Pushing down will flare the card out and get more surface area to scrape. We can put other ones in. All right, so I don't want to miss any wet and wet opportunities, but I think at this point, let's connect this back behind here. And soften it up some. Let's give it a dry off. Alrighty, if you have earbuds on, just watch out. Okay, so after that dry off, quite a few things came to mind. First of all, I do like this combination of the quinacridone rose and the phthalo green as the background. I think that's an interesting combination with this sap green Venetian red in front. Looking at my application of that background, it looks as though it came out more airy and tree-ish. No, sorry, airy and skyish as opposed to tree-ish. So I'm thinking that next time, because I think this is in a working combination of colors, next time be a little bit more definitive with those shapes so that they didn't turn into clouds. Also saw the drying shift that took place that I told you about with the sap green and the Venetian red. So that's why I'm all the way back here putting this stuff in. And putting it just along the bottom of this grouping and creating it here. I could texturize and soften. And I could add Payne's Gray to darken. And I could do textural strokes for the illusion of grass and whatnot down here. This is the edge. And the water will catch that. Edge, water will catch that. Okay, stand up, take a look, see how things are looking. Then let's move over to the hake. Not the hake, the rigger. We'll get Payne's Gray. We'll just get a dark mixed up. Payne's Gray, Sap Green, just whatever I can just to get the illusion of any type of dark. I'm really not too concerned about its composition color-wise. And I'm going to accentuate the backside of these trees. And this is to help them kind of pop forward, give them a little bit more detail, a little bit more dimension. You could stagger these strokes and put foliage in between them, just to get them in there. Take the side of the brush to kind of ground them in place. They're going to have their shadow, so they kind of meld the dark mass from the backside into the ground. And if you want some squiggles for the reflections, but not all the reflections need to be there in the water, just, you know, a little illusion of them. Let's see. I could take down a more watery mixture so it's a little bit lighter, and I can apply that as branches. So doing this will give me a variety of tones within the branches themselves. And that in turn will give a more 3D effect to these foreground trees. So varying the water concentration and potentially just the mixture of colors could give us a change within here. Not too much rhyme or reason to the shapes and how I'm putting them in. It's more there to just get a lot of these strokes out and in place. These bigger ones might have somebody that comes off. Somebody comes off here, but we're not going to get too crazy with them. So eventually we're going to add foliage in and around. You can leave them bare if you want. I like to use the side and the heel of the rigger brush for textural strokes. I might even add a stone bridge back in here to make things interesting. One thing I was talking to a friend of mine about with these kind of tonal paintings, there's, and I think I might have mentioned in another video, I just haven't gotten to it yet, where there is there's a place I used to like to go kayaking and fishing and all that, and now when I go there I do some bow fishing, and it's called the Atchafalaya Basin, where in Louisiana, as you head out to the so Baton Rouge on I-10, there's between Breaux Bridge and Baton Rouge, there's the Atchafalaya Bridge that passes over the basin, and it's a big long bridge. And the Atchafalaya Basin is what bayous and swamps and all that type of stuff. And there's a whole bunch of canals in it that were, I think, dug by the Army Corps of Engineers. And you know, it's a big spot for people to go. But down the middle of it is that huge long bridge, miles and miles of it, and it's high up in the air, flat, high up in the air. I once was kayaking and I was underneath it during a storm because it was so raining so bad. It rolled out of nowhere. But anyway, what I was thinking, eventually one day putting in a bridge like it in the background in this soft color to give the illusion of the Atchafalaya Basin bridge. It kind of helps set the location. It would also be as if it was like a Roman aqueduct or bridges you'll see in Europe and whatnot in the far background in the fog. So I think eventually once I start adding that in, not only would it set a scene for me, a location, but it would also help people that are painting that don't live in Louisiana, don't live in the swamp and whatnot, and how they can tie that effect over to what they see and what they have. You could easily have some buildings on a foggy day and then have a big old bridge in the background, and that could be the Brooklyn Bridge. When I lived in New York, across the Brooklyn Bridge one night, that was very pretty beautiful sight. The one side though comes from like an awesome area, and then the other side of the bridge is just like the middle of nowhere. Like it felt like it was just some unnamed street. There was no businesses, no signs, no nothing. It was the weirdest thing. I'm just putting these guys in, putting little sticks and twigs, putting shadows in for them, putting little reflections. I think I'll put a low bridge here. I want to make it more purple. So let's just grab more Venetian red, ultramarine. We could also put somebody fishing in here. Could also put a boat. Should I do that instead? Let's see if we can get a boat. Let me plan it out on a separate sheet of paper. Boat with the person with oars coming out. Like in this spot location, I'm just gonna make sure it doesn't look like a bird flying in the water. I have to cut some more strips and have these things prepared for future videos. It really does come in handy. Put the oars out. There's somebody out here kayaking. Soften up those reflections on the oars a little bit. I think that's pretty interesting. We have that person out there. I don't have the kayak anymore, but when I had it, there was a rope on the front of it, and you take your oar and jam it forward and keep it in place when you're fishing. Obviously, on a kayak, one would go down, the other side would go up. So here we look at it as just somebody with a rowboat or something. So maybe the rows are out, the oars are out, sorry. We can give them a fishing pole. We just got to go thin with this. Now, I'll tell you, one of the creepiest things is being out in the marsh in the evening, just because the water gets dark, you can't see down into it, and you're just like, what's down in there? And the morning was never bad. Like when we'd go duck hunting, and maybe because there was other people there with me, you know, we'd just be out getting the boat, driving it out to the duck blind, etc. It was just nice, refreshing, cold, etc. So I don't know what it was about the evening that made it weird. Like spooky. One thing I've been thinking about, and I've been doing mental experiments in my head with it, I want to explain why the surface appears to be on top of the reflected image, and do a video on it, like the kind of scientific aspect of it. I just haven't gotten around to that yet. This is just texture on the top, just dry brushing sideways with the rigger. Pretty fun. One thing we could probably do is mimic his shape in the sky with some birds. I haven't put any foliage in on these foreground trees and bramble, so what I really need to do, and one thing that I neglect, is making sure I go to the top of the page. I always emphasize painting to the side and making sure that that whole scene is widened and taken care of. So I need to also just apply that vertically. Payne's gray. I think a black would be interesting to really help these guys pop. I'm debating utilizing some of that. Payne's gray might be dark enough for us. We'll see how it dries. At this point, the painting is almost essentially done. It's just kind of like little finesse, little tickling of spots. So if you'd like to watch the end, you know, feel free. Also, now's a good time for me to pitch the whole Patreon thing. If you're interested in becoming a patron, just helping support the arts and the ability to make these videos and whatnot, please consider it. I have like two tiers, like a $3 tier and a $5 tier. $3 is just essentially just a little support, just to help buy some paint, papers, canvases, etc. The $5 tier, I try to produce a little bit of exclusive content for those patrons. Earlier, was it today or yesterday, I did a whole sketching video for them. I'd like to maintain as much free content as possible, so I'd appreciate y'all's support. But just check out all the links and whatnot, and like I said, just have fun, ask questions. Let's say I had a little bit of thick stippled foliage. I'm not going to go overbearing with it. Sap green, Venetian red. The Venetian red is so strong. Fill up this corner. I'm going to try to prevent symmetry here. See how we have openings and closures on that side, so I'm just trying to prevent that, but you're just adding some masses to kind of frame the scene. Payne's gray. I encourage you to experiment with black on this one. I am refraining from it just because I wanted to keep the palette as minimal as possible. It's just a personal quirk of mine. You can go as crazy with the palette as you want. I'm not trying to ever give any rules or anything like that. A minimal palette, it is believed that it does help with uniformity, and I am of that belief. Some think that black is a crutch, that it'll become too relied upon as opposed to actually mixing darks and whatnot, which makes perfect sense. But I try not to let my biases come out. Even if those statements are completely true or not, I really don't want to instill any bias in y'all. I once read that they had done studies on females where if they had a teacher, in a certain grade, a female teacher at a younger age that had lacked confidence in the areas of mathematics, and I think expressed that difficulty, and these were like teachers, the students themselves, the female students, would take on that lack of confidence within the areas of mathematics. It's it's just the same thing as if you have somebody who's spouting racist stuff at home, and the kids grow up around it, and then they start taking that on. There's prejudice where if somebody's teaching something, they might not realize that they're doing it, but they could be instilling ideas in people that are watching and learning from them. So that's why I always try to be very careful about any color statements I make in regards to utilizing white paint, because some people don't like that in painting, or black paint, because some people don't like that. They think it's, like I said, a crutch. And people with pre-mixed colors, green is some people view that as a crutch as well. But it's also it's just a convenience color, so you got to know how to use it rather than abuse it. So let's try it off, sign it, and we'll see what it looks like. Alright, it's mostly dry. I'll do a little bit more drying when I take the picture of it. We'll sign it, put a mat over it, and then I will sign off and tell you have a great day. So let's find a nice place to sign. Right down here. Okay, let's put a mat over the top. I'm going to pull the camera out of its little cradle and show you what it looks like. All right, I'm signing off. I hope you enjoyed, and I will talk to y'all soon. Have a great day.